Well, thank you everyone for joining the Executive Dashboards panel. I'm Claire Fletcher and I'm going to moderate the discussion today. And before we get started, I'm going to ask the panel members to introduce themselves, and as well as saying who they are, talk a little bit about whether they are internally or externally community focused or both. And I'm going to go alphabetically. So Alison, if you could introduce yourself.
Sure, I'd be happy to. So Alison Bratman with UKG, that's Ultimate Kronos Group. So you might be familiar with the Ultimate software or with Kronos. And last year, as if the pandemic wasn't enough, we also decided to merge two global organizations. So UKG is our new organization name. And we have primarily an external community that we are building, but today we have two legacy communities, Ultimate Software's community and Kronos's community. So we are working to build our future state UKG community.
So some interesting challenges on trying to get those to merge together.
Right.
Thanks, Alison. Kai?
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Kai. Just letting you get used to the accent while I hover here for a second or two. I'm half Danish, half Australian, the CEO of Swoop Analytics. And we help organizations improve collaboration on internal social platforms. So that's me.
Thank you. And John?
Great. Well, my accent is from Texas. You may not be able to figure that out as I talk, but that's where I'm calling in from. So I actually work for Verint. We are a technology platform provider that does both internal and external communities. Predominantly, we serve the external facing market, but a lot of our customers tend to want that level of transparency inside. So I'll be coming at this conversation from how Verint uses it for its own Verint community and how our executives like to know what's working and not working, but also in talking to our customers that need to report on the value of their community projects to their executives.
Perfect. Well, I think that's a very good lead in to the first question that we were going to talk through, which is what are leading organizations doing with their executive dashboards? And John, I don't know if you want to start us off there.
Sure. So from a standpoint of communities specifically, these days people are using communities for self-service. And as this audience knows, you begin to build trust and it expands beyond things like customer service and self-service. It begins to expand and become all things digital for the company. So there's different phases of that approach, and I'm sure the rest of the panel will talk about that as well. But what we're finding is first engagement, are people coming? Are they finding value? But not just that, but how are they navigating there? So using the system tools that are built in, but also using other BI tools or other tools that can understand behavior of traffic, like Pendo, for example, to be able to see a journey and know where they're spending most of their time. And it really begins to iterate. So that's not just the system, but there's a lot of other systems around it that are counting on that data.
And you mentioned finding value. How do you express that in an executive dashboard? So you're looking at the journey through the site, but what else are you doing to be able to demonstrate value or impact?
Sure. So the first thing I would submit would be, what was the original purpose or the objective of the community? And that's what you, for us, that's what you base the very first set of metrics around. So if it's first to get the level of engagement, to get critical mass, so that people can begin to support each other or provide self-service, or even support each other, you want to get critical mass. So just sheer number of participants is a good indicator. And then you can begin to translate that into, all right, we've reached critical mass. We have more people answering each other's questions. We have now more impressions. People are coming there to trust it more likely. And that starts to not just provide cost savings for value, right? But it also begins to provide impressions for us to market the new product or have meaningful conversations about product enhancements once we get that critical mass. So not just cost savings value, but really revenue generating long-term value.
And I think that's a really important point you made about the different phases, that what you're measuring and what your executives are going to be interested in when you first launch is not the same as they'll be interested in 6 months or a year down the line.
Right.
Thank you for that. Alison, what does it look like in your organization and previous places you've worked with your executive dashboards?
So we work really hard to show the impact that the community is making on those organization level goals and outcomes. So I think the pre-work that has to happen to be able to do that is to be intentional about aligning your community to those business level objectives and outcomes. And then the next step is logically to measure that. So one of ours at UKG is, to wow our customers and to keep them for life. So you can imagine the role that the community can play with increasing customer loyalty, reducing attrition, driving self-service, and that feeling of belonging. So that's probably the most important thing we're doing with our executive dashboards. But there's also just the regular community operations, right? We use it to inform and make decisions about how we're operating our community and our community programs. And that helps us really forecast and plan for our future state.
I'm probably going to come back to you on 2 points there, because there's a lot of interesting stuff in there. So the first thing I'll probably come back to when I've asked Kai this question is just when you talked about the wow factor. That's obviously something that's not going to pop up in a canned report. So I'd love to know more about how you illustrate the wow factor. And I think also just talking through kind of what that looks like, not just where do you gather that information from, but what does that look like on a dashboard. But I just want to get Kai's take on this, and then I'll come back to you if that's okay. Sure. Kai, what are you seeing people doing with their executive dashboards?
So I have to say that I can only talk about internal communities and not external ones, because our platform only connects to internal platforms like Workplace from Facebook and Yammer from Microsoft. It's kind of interesting. I think it's undoubtedly driven by the pandemic. I'm not sure whether you guys on the call have experienced this too, but we hear a lot from customers that there's a real nervousness about people starting to feel disconnected from their companies because they're not in the office, they're working from home, they're working remotely, and that sort of, esprit de corps, where you band together as a company, those things you can do. They're trying to use their internal social platforms to create that parallel digital culture. And that means it's really important for executives to be listening to the conversations that are happening, understanding whether they're concerns about, and you can appreciate that, especially in the US, about vaccinations. There's a lot of, Black Lives Matter, the health and well-being, lots of discussions that are happening at the moment. So I think what we're seeing is there's a very strong interest in the moment from senior leaders to understand what are the conversations that are happening. How engaged are people in those conversations? And if we run this as a little experiment here in the call today, those of you that are listening, if you can just say hi in the chat part now. So imagine I'm a person, I'm a senior leader, and I'm sort of wondering what's going on. If you can all just tab away, all you have to say is just hi in the chat area. That would be fantastic. It's those conversations, howdy, thank you, thanks Jason, thanks. So, you can see those conversations happening. And if I'm sitting here going, let me try and get the sense of what's going on, what's the sentiment of those conversations? What are the key themes that people are talking about? That gives me as an executive, absolute deep insights into the tone, the conversation, what people are concerned or worried about that I need to take action on. And some of our customers have a lot of people in retail frontline, and they care about selling goods, selling stuff, removing friction from the front line. So they're paying a lot of attention to those conversations where problems are coming up. So for us, that's what I'm seeing. It's this intense interest in the conversations and what people are talking about.
So not just the engagement and that they're there, but the actual topics and what's on people's minds.
Yeah,
that's really interesting. And I think that's perhaps a difference between internal and external. We'll talk more about that in a moment. Wanted to go back to Alison and talking about the wow factor. I don't know how much you can share about this, but is there anything you can tell us about how that actually shows up on a dashboard and where you get that information from?
So that's one of our new UKG level goals. So we haven't built out those dashboards yet, but that's what we'll be working to do. I can imagine it'll be a mix of things that we're comfortable measuring today, like engagement and best answers and value, and then some new things too, maybe sentiment analysis or something with a more qualitative feel to it.
Perfect, thank you. And the other thing you said before that I thought was very interesting was about using your general community metrics to make decisions. And I think that's always something that's really key, because if you're measuring things and you don't know what you can take action on as a result of that, then kind of why are you measuring it? And I think that's probably quite different at the community manager level than it is from the executive level. So very interested if any of you have seen ways that you have to present information to execs that will allow them to make those C-suite level decisions about how the community comes into play.
Sure, I can speak to that if you like. The executive dashboard isn't one size fits all, right? Each C-level is looking for their particular part of business. Clearly, the CEO cares about all of them, but when you look at the chief customer officer or the chief service officer, they're focusing in on not just the level of engagement, but the amount of return they're getting in that relationship. So things like how many people came, how many questions were asked, how many were answered, and by who were they answered, right? And where are those gaps? Now that seems very tactical and very granular, but if you can rise above it and look at it from a standpoint of, hey, we've got 8,000 inquiries came in, right, this month, for example, half of them were answered within a certain period of time, and of those, a quarter of them were champions of our product that weren't even employees, right? Oh, but look at this section over here. I have a longer response time. Why is that? Is that because the product is more complex? Is that because I don't have enough information available to my customers to self-serve? Are my employees not properly staffing during this period, right? So it could be topic-oriented. It could be a skill set-oriented situation, right? So the chief service officer cares about that. The marketing officer is going to care about how many people subscribe to my blogs, or how many people started out originally engaging us as a support request that's now following our product tips, or have signed up to be part of the focus group, right, on this next product coming out next year, for example. So each C-level is going to look for their specific area. They're related, but they're very focused on their particular part of the business.
So sorry, just as I unmute to ask a question, a fire engine goes past. Alison, perhaps you can talk a little bit about what your executives expect to see. And I love that point you made, John, about how executives aren't this homogenous group. They're all got their special areas of interest, and they're interested in different things based on their priorities.
Sure.
Alison, what does that look like for you? Oh, sorry.
Oh, go ahead. No, I mean, I was just gonna confirm. So, I mean, if I look at the way Verint Community it's called Verint Connect, right? So that's support, that's marketing, that's partner enablement, that's developer exchange, that's everything, right? So there's different audiences, but in general, the expectation is that is the place for anything you need related to the products and services, as well as the cloud products tapping into. So if you have one of our products, you have an automatic link into that community for the resources you need. So just being a customer with a product, you have a link directly into that to interact with other people using that product. So that's important to be able to not just know the kind of engagement, but where's it coming from and the types of users in that.
And Alison, I think you've answered this to an extent already, but how are you seeing different executives be interested in different things on your dashboard? We talked a little bit about various different areas of interest, but are you seeing very distinct areas, and do you produce multiple dashboards for different execs, or is it one thing that you tend to produce?
We do tailor them to a certain extent. So I think there's different, just to John's point, right? There's different areas of interest or focus based on the executive's, responsibility area. And often what we're doing is trying to zoom out and show the role that community is playing in that bigger picture. So for example, with our support, our chief support officer, we call it customer success. So chief customer success officer, right? We're zooming out and looking at what percentage of cases or calls is community deflecting. And then what was the opportunity? So out of the cases and calls that did come in, what did we already have a knowledge article or a group discussion or something about that perhaps we could have deflected? So just one example of how we're trying to zoom out and look at the role that community is playing in that business for that executive.
And I think that also speaks to what you said earlier about being intentional about your goals. I think it's very easy to just run a set of reports and call it done, but actually, those execs have an idea of or hopefully have an idea of what they want the community to be doing for them, and the metrics need to kind of measure how well you're doing against that. I think we probably can't repeat that too many times if that's the one tip for figuring out what you want to measure.
Right.
Just because
it's not always easy.
Doesn't mean you should be measuring or recording it, right?
Yeah.
It's losing your keys and you're looking over the light, but that wasn't where you were, but the light's better there, right? Like, well, it's not where you should be. So.
Kai, what does this look like for you? I know you talked about execs at the moment being very interested in topics, but from an internal perspective, what are those execs interested in seeing as apart from the topics of conversation?
Can I show you? Is that all right?
Please,
so,
yeah.
Sometimes it's more fun to have a look at a real example. So I'm going to show you a couple of different examples where organizations have done exactly what Alison and John is saying, is they're taking our data and then they turn it into their own stories. And you can see the different kind of things that they do with it. So I'm going to show you a couple of different examples here. So let me just bring this screen up here.
Speaking of wow factor, the way these are presented are really quite impressive on some of these infographics. So I was very happy to see those.
So thanks. The first one I want to show you here, you can see this, is this coming up all right? Is it sharing okay, the screen? So the first one I'm showing you here is a large bank, about 40,000 people, and there is a much more detailed dashboard that sits behind this for the community managers. This actually ended up on a specific request from the CEO to have this up and like one of those 50-inch monitors in his office. He cared, and this is all about social listening. He was interested in a couple of different things. He wanted to find out what are the most engaging posts. So this is what are people talking about. He wanted to know the hot topics. So these are the keywords or hashtags or things like that are these are trending topics. He wanted to find out the communities or the groups that were most active on their network, and also the influential people. So he wanted to, and he actually used that. This is an awesome idea. He took the top 200 most influential people and created a special CEO feedback forum, a special community set up, people that he wanted to engage with, because he knew that these were the opinion leaders, that were very active and had lots of connections in the business. So I thought this is, for me, is talking about what leading organizations is doing. This is listening and then ensure you tap into that pool of connected people you have in your organization. And I think this could apply to external as well. Just imagine if you are running the Apple communities and you said, I'm going to, all the key people that are contributors, they're probably already doing this, actually. I don't know. I do that. And then bring them closer in, because you have this army of champions. So that's one example that I really like. And you can also see here, I don't think we are offending anyone on the call if I say that most CEOs' attention span is like a goldfish. So you can't you really got to like just the top 5, nothing more than that. So you can glance in this and see what's going on. Now, the next example I'm going to show you it's a little bit different. This is an organization called Agreco. It's kind of an emergency power company in the UK. They actually did the power supply for the Olympics as well. And you can see they've taken data out of our platform and they've created their own infographic. And you can see that they have headlines around uptake and activity and who posted. So you can see this is a lot more complex. It's not just like a 10-second job to have a look at this, but it's visually also quite appealing and engaging. So this is a little bit more of a wow factor maybe. I think about content and places and people who are the top this and that can really sort of create some excitement and engagement. And I think this is a pretty nice way of doing it. Then
I love the working out loud part there as well.
Yeah, it's pretty. I mean, I like that. They sort of got. You can see they also have their top topics down here. They have their top, top people and so forth, and some numbers. So it talks both to the people that are interested in just numbers and those that are interested in kind of more like the stories behind the numbers. Then I thought I'd show you this one. It's also quite different. This is a private health insurance company, and they were running a campaign, really crowdsourcing. It was led by the CEO, and it was crowdsourcing, setting basically the vision and the mission for the company. And the campaign was called the Heart of Medibank. And the internal comms team had to go back to report to the CEO and to the company about how relevant and how successful that campaign had been. And in this case, they've taken some of our data, but you can see how they've sort of put they've wrapped their own sort of wrap around it. And they really, so this comes directly from them. They're saying, well, 4 out of 5 of the most engaging posts had our CEO engaging on purpose and value. Like bang, that we did that. The Heart of Medibank, that hashtag resonated across the network. It's one of the most popular topics of the year. And then we do something special about we calculate personas around, and actually for all the executives, we know so how active they've been on the platform. And that's probably something that might be more relevant for an internal platform than an external one. But we make a big point that you have to be in there and be visible on these internal platforms. So the fact that the CEO comes up so highly means that they are not just, in this case it's a he, wasn't just sitting there and observing, but actively contributing to the campaign. And I think this is a nice way. It's simple numbers, but it's extremely powerful to demonstrate the impact the campaign is having on the company.
Yeah, and I think
this is really
sometimes
walk, isn't it? That's what this is about, is making sure that you've got, if you have executive level sponsorship in your community programs, you already have success in the making, right? This is a great example. Sorry, Claire.
And I think you don't necessarily always get that amount of energy around a values topic. So seeing that power of having the CEO actually engaged and really showing proper interest in it, I think is probably why people are wanting to engage around that topic.
So I do have one more example, but there's kind of 2 aspects to the executive dashboards. One is when we are reporting to the executives, but another one that we might come back to later is when you report about the executives. Okay, and that's an entirely different.
Hold that thought.
We'll hold that for later.
Okay, we will definitely come back to that. So just wanted to talk a little bit about the key differences between dashboards for internal and external. And I think we've actually uncovered some of that as we've been talking, but does anybody else have other thoughts about the key differences there? Perhaps we've covered it all. I think.
Yeah, so I think as Kai pointed out, right, he shows an example of employees interacting with each other and then understanding what's being said, and so participation and connectedness, right? That's similar with external communities, but because I find it so much easier to, on the back of a napkin, do an ROI around external facing, self-serve, best practices to improve revenue for renewals and customer success. I think they're similar because you care about the engagement, the connectedness to each other and to the brand. But I think, as Alison said, externally they're focusing on what line of business and what part within the line of business is getting what they need out of it. Whereas I'm not sure internally, and Kai, please correct me if I'm wrong here, I'm not sure if internally there's so much concern about line of business or division as much as it is culture, projects, vision of the company as a whole, as opposed to areas of the business. I don't know. I could be off there. Does that make sense?
I think it depends on use case again. So I think as a whole, definitely the culture and the engagement is a piece. But I would imagine organizations maybe like IT would be interested in looking at how much self-service people are able to do on an internal community as opposed to raising a ticket. But I think that's probably the only area it's easier to stick a dollar value on that engagement. Whereas if you're trying to measure how connected people feel to the organization or how much more likely they are to stay and have an impact on the attrition rate, I think it's probably difficult to figure that out because there's so many factors that go into that.
Onboarding, attrition, churn rates. It's very similar to customer models as well. But, we all know it's very, very important to keep talent, keep them engaged with each other so they don't feel like they're, especially now, right? If they don't see each other every day, right? They need to feel like they're part of the team and part of something bigger than themselves, and that's why they want to stay, right? So,
I think
that's a really good call out. And I'm just wondering, this is not one of our sort of pre-planned questions, but I'll come back to this later. I'm interested in any differences you've seen in pandemic reporting. So Kai's talked about how people are now more interested in topic and engagement, but I'd love to know if that's had any impact on external community dashboards. But I'll move on for now for the top tips question. So what are your few top tips for creating an executive dashboard? Alison, what are your thoughts on this?
I have 5.
The more the merrier.
First, start with what you have. So I think it's really easy to get overwhelmed and maybe feel like you don't have access to the data that you want or need. But I would just take inventory of what you already have access to and of what your business partners have access to, and then think about how this data connects to the story that you're trying to tell. And then how might you organize that into a dashboard that really quantifies the story or helps kind of propel it forward. So that's the first one, start with what you have. The second one is to prioritize. So decide what's most important and work on that, and then create a backlog or a roadmap for everything else. I think, again, easy to get overwhelmed or kind of fumble through where to start. So just decide what's most important, start with that. Put everything else on the backlog so you don't lose sight of all those good ideas or things you want to move to. The third one is really starting your dashboards early. So you should be thinking about what you want to measure during the community implementation project. As you're building out the community, that's the right time to define what you will measure and ensure that your team's going to have access to that data. You may even need to integrate a measurement tool or two into the actual community. So it's really critical that you build that data strategy alongside the actual community. If you wait, till you roll out or till you're QAing, you've really missed a big window of opportunity. So 1, 2, 3. So the fourth one is really removing clutter and being intentional about your visual. So think about your audience. They're an executive. You really need to boil it down to the highlights or the headlines. What is it that you're trying to communicate? What context do they need to understand the analysis? And what action do you want them to take? find the best way to visualize that, put all the labels, kind of descriptions that are needed, and then remove everything else, right? Get rid of any noise, anything that might be competing for their attention or confusing the message. Last one is create a feedback loop. So it's really important to get feedback to understand if it's working, right? What's missing, how others might be utilizing the data, maybe in ways that you never expected, and to help see what opportunities others might have for this data.
Fantastic, thank you. I love all of those. And I also love the point about making sure that you've got this planning before you roll out, because I think the other part of that is like you may need to have baseline measurements of what things look like before the community exists. And I think sometimes people, you know, all the fire and fury of trying to get a community launched, it's not always a priority for people.
That's right.
John, what are your top tips?
So you actually alluded to the first one, and that is have a benchmark. Know where you are before you start, right? Because you don't know how you've improved or not improved until you have a benchmark. So that's the first one. Second one is context. I think Alison said that. Make sure that there's full context on what it is that you're reporting on. Just because you can report on it doesn't mean it's important, or that people that you're trying to get the message to understand why it is important. Because I think if you have context, then you can have a conversation around, well, if you know that, what kind of decisions can you make based on that? Because if you're out of alignment there, I don't care how pretty it is, it's not useful.
Yeah, what I would call the so what factor.
The what?
The so what factor. Like
So
it might be
factor.
pretty, but if it's not kind of telling me something useful, then so what?
Exactly. So that's the first two. The third one I would say is get the numbers right. There's nothing worse than presenting a number and then having someone ask you a question about it, and then you realize as you're trying to explain that number that you were off a little bit, right? So you ever picked up a spreadsheet and you go, oh, this is a really cool tool. And then the first cell you happen to look at how it was built, it's wrong. And then now you question every cell and every worksheet because, oh crap. So make sure the numbers are right, right? If there's anything that's subjective or objective, if you frankly have a range, it's okay to say, here's my range based on what I can measure at the moment. We'll tighten that up next time we come back, but make sure that what you do report on, the numbers are accurate and you can defend them. Because if they're wrong, you've lost credibility and you're going to have a hard time getting that back. So
that's given me kind of horror goosebumps just thinking about that.
I mean, we've all had someone send us a spreadsheet and it looks really great, and you run the numbers, it's a great model, and you realize, wait a minute, what is that? And then it starts to break down, right? And then you're worried to even use it for somebody else, right? And the last one I would say, and this kind of goes back to what Kai showed, it needs to be aesthetically pleasing. Make sure the logo's there. Make sure you're using the colors for the brand. Be intentional about making sure that the C-levels understand that you are doing this as an agent of the corporation, supporting them, and therefore present it back to them in their own brand, right? So those are my four.
Fantastic, thank you. Kai, what about you? What are your top tips?
What more do I say? I think Alison and John did that pretty well. So I can only embellish slightly. So we've been doing this internal analytics for the last 7 years, and every like I say, couple of months, we look back at the data and we go, oh, there's something new. There's some new insights in here that we didn't appreciate. I'm going to give you an example that's just a couple of years old. We suddenly realized that it might be a good idea to check how often people ask questions and see whether they had an impact on the response rate. I can't remember what triggered that. It might have been someone asking about it on LinkedIn or discussion group. We went through the data and we found this huge impact it has when people ask a question. You get 150% more responses to posts. And then you go, oh, this can inform strategy, help us actually get people to ask more questions because we know what impact it has. So I think the more data you can get your hands on, and the more you can talk to people and ask them questions and, just ask them things, what decisions that they have to make. Go back, have a look at your data again. Go back, I don't know, periodically and go like, can I answer that now? Can I certainly look at some ratios that I haven't thought about before? I think I'm surprised that we can continue to learn new things. So you keep on learning and you're getting more mature about this. You are thinking about it. And I think also, you can learn so much from what people in your industry are doing. If you look at haven't we all looked at Google Analytics? It's like, oh, how are they presenting data? And we looked a lot at what Garmin is doing because they're really good at motivating people to exercise. So we got like, oh, what can I learn from Garmin about the way that they're presenting the data? It's a lot about nudging. It's a lot about praising. How can we build that into our platform? So I think you can steal ideas and be inspired from other people. And especially if you're small, we don't have the R&D and the usability experts that really, really big companies have. So we just try and go out and see what they're doing, be inspired. And I think that's open for all of us to do that, be inspired what they're doing. But other than that, I can't really add to what Alison and John have said because they're really good pieces of advice.
And I think what you said about learning is very much similar to what Alison said about that feedback loop of also like what would we like to know that we didn't ask before, and how can we find that out? And I also love the idea of stealing from.
And isn't this what the Community Roundtable is all about? Isn't that why we're here?
Absolutely.
To actually build that learning forum where this is a safe haven to ask questions and connect with people that have done it before, those that are trying out. So I think this is such an important part that we ask each other for help.
Definitely. We are about to come to our last question, but before we do, Kai, you mentioned earlier about reporting about the executive, and I didn't want to miss that off. So tell us more about that.
So the thing is, this probably only applies to internal. So for some of you that are mostly interested in external, I do apologize. They really have to be in there participating. We've seen over and over again, we do the world's largest benchmarking study of Yammer, for instance, and all the people the organizations that are performing really well, they have, there's a few exceptions, but most of them have senior leaders that are very active, okay? Now, the good thing about senior leaders is they are competitive, right? And there's nothing like saying, oh, look what Mary is doing, look what Bob is doing, and how that can really, how that can change your own behavior. And we've actually seen some of the research we've done is that if a senior leader is active, let's say, for instance, Claire, that you're my CEO. If I'm lucky enough to be blessed by a like or reply from Claire, the CEO, my use is going up by about 150% following having received a like or reply from a very senior person. So it has an incredible positive sort of reinforcing power when the senior leaders are active. And we hear for lots of them, it's really the only way that they can engage at scale with people in different time zones. And as I said, this importance of feeling connected to the company, I think these enterprise social platforms, the internal ones, are really the way that you can do that. So how can we motivate the senior leaders through numbers and a bit of gamification to do this? And I'll just show you the last example I had I thought I'd show you today about how you can do that. So we do two things, I guess. We operate with these, we call them personas, and you only get this kind of persona based on your behavioral profile. So if you are someone that doesn't participate, an observer, well, that's not good, is it? We don't want them to be broadcasters either. We want them to be responders, catalysts, or engagers. That's the kind of behavioral profile. And actually, senior leaders understand this far faster than they understand 2.8 on a scale of 0 to 5, because this is a picture, it's words, it speaks to them, and they understand it quickly. Now, what I can then do, I can go back, for instance, this example here. I've got myself actually, and I've got two of my colleagues in here. Here's our recalcitrant CTO who hates being social. Actually, Oh, not just joking here because Paul is a nice fellow. But you can see here, he's made 2 posts where I've made 39. I've made 212 replies and Paul has made 4. So you can see here like how different in our little team of 3 people, how varied this is. Now, Melinda Scheller here, she's from the bio agri-tech company called Syngenta in Switzerland. And her point in a case study that we wrote with them was all about actually creating such a leaderboard and showing this to the top 200 leaders and saying, hey, do you want some help? Like, how can we help you become better at this? And this created an immense sense of friendly competition and real eagerness to become better. Because I think most of these senior leaders simply don't know what to do. Like they crave out for help. So this is like a Fitbit, like, hey, Kai, you haven't done your 10,000 steps today. How can I, what do I do? Do I get a dog? What do I do to sort of get more active? And once you have the senior leaders doing that, so I'm fortunate enough to lead our organization, and because I'm very active we use different social platforms internally, but one of them is Yammer, and this data is out of Yammer, and I'm very active on Yammer, and that kind of legitimizes the platform for all of our colleagues, right? Because when the senior leadership team is there, like Melinda is saying, when when your leader is there, why aren't you? It becomes really hard not to be there. So that's just the last example I'd leave you with. And actually, the very first person I talked about, where we had this example over here, the guy that was running the bank a few years ago, Brian Hartzer, in addition to this, he had up on another board a list of himself and his direct reports on that board. And you would not want to be the last person on this board when you were in Brian's office, right? So it's friendly competition, but there's some if you're serious about this, you measure it and you hold yourself accountable to it. And I think that's what inspirational leaders are doing.
I think that's such a good point for internal communities, that kind of competition aspect. And I hope anyone who has got an internal community and is trying to get their C-suite engaged got that figure from Kai about how much engagement goes up when you get a like or a response from the CEO, because that's pure gold from an engagement point of view. All right, I'm going to take us to our last question, then we can take some audience questions. And we wanted to talk about how you're innovating around executive dashboards. So, John, what does that look like for you?
I think it's pulling in data from other sources, that you're not just counting on just the community data. But like I mentioned, integrations with products that can look at user journeys, like Pendo, for example. Those are telling. They could help with helping you figure out the wow factor. Are people lost when they get there, or are they getting to what they need when they need it? So not just the community metrics, but other tools as well to monitor. You mentioned Google Analytics, for example. That's a good indicator, right? You can put a little JavaScript on each page to find out kind of page views and stuff. But you need to be able to have different views of the activity from different channels, if you will, into that space.
Wonderful. And Alison, how are you innovating here? I know you're not a vendor, so you're not going to be doing technical innovation, but what does that look like for you?
So I have to start by giving credit to our team. Our community team is really incredible, and I'm including our data analysts that we share here with our learning team. So they're really open to trying new things, to getting feedback, looking for opportunities to improve. I think you have to have that mindset when you're coming into dashboarding. So I'll share 2 examples. Earlier this year, we ran a pilot project to explore how we might benefit from sentiment analysis. So using a natural language processing text mining technique to understand the sentiment or the emotional state of our community. We also looked at specific discussion threads. We learned a lot about what that could or couldn't do for us in that pilot project. It really validated a lot of the the themes that our community managers were sharing, anyways, but it helped us do it at scale. We also learned that this really requires a very specific advanced skill set and expertise, which is highly sought after by others at our organization. So we really needed to make our case if we wanted to do this on a long-term basis. And then it required a lot more human intervention than we expected. So it wasn't just as simple as exporting and importing content and like letting it run, so to speak. There's a lot more kind of manual steps to do it. So it wasn't quite as efficient or easy as we might have thought at the beginning of the pilot project. So that's one example of innovation. The second, which to me is very simple but very brilliant, is our team has been working to drive self-service in our dashboards. So building the dashboards in a way that enables our leaders to personalize them to see exactly what they're interested in. So they can filter by audience type or by customer, by discussion group, by a date range. It really creates a win-win for us because that leader gets exactly the segment or the slice of data that they're looking for in real time. And then it's one less thing, right, for our team to do, right? They get that kind of real-time responsiveness from our team. So it feels like a win-win to do that, and we're looking for more ways to do that.
That's wonderful, because you definitely want them to be interested, but you don't want them to be bombarding you with requests every 5 minutes for a different cut of the data.
Right. I think the hardest part is getting them there, right? So yeah, having them, bookmark the link or know that's their go-to resource. But once we can do that, we're in good shape.
Perfect. And Kai, what about you? What are you, if you're able to share with us, what you are innovating on around this?
Oh, this is a big secret. I can't tell you. I have to shoot you. No, so one thing in particular, we do this really big benchmarking, as I mentioned, of Yammer, but also of Teams, Microsoft Teams. I'm not sure how many of you guys, if you're on the call, you're still there, just type in if you're a Teams user or not, just to get a sense of how many. It's going crazy, Microsoft Teams, so there's a lot of people using it. I'm keen to find out how many on the call are on Teams, so if you could pop it in the chat, that'd be wonderful. We found out that a lot of people, there's a lot of people that stop them from going to their internal social platforms. Well, it could be Slack as well. Yeah, so there's probably a combination of Teams and Slack and so forth. And they go for these chat tools rather than, I guess, where we'd like them to go, which is the enterprise social tools from an internal perspective. So what we're working at the moment is that realizing that we understand that we have to nudge people into, I guess, using this like the when tool, what tool when. And we found out, we're sort of doing some big benchmarking analysis at the moment, and we're sort of finding out what does good look like. So in organizations, we have a really large data set, and we're looking at, we have data about how people are using both Teams and Yammer and email and OneDrive and SharePoint and all this, to find out what are the combination of tools and recommendations we can make to someone. So for instance, we know that the people that are really strong collaborators, for every one Yammer or Teams channel message, they sent 9.4 emails. If you send more than 9.4 emails for every Yammer or Teams message, you have a preference for email. And we want to nudge you away from sending email and trying to sort of nudge you into maybe, hey, don't use email for that, might do it over here. So I think we have a role in nudging and helping people to think about their collaboration style from an internal perspective, and then sort of slowly sort of push them, encourage them to consider using these enterprise social platforms when that's relevant. Simple things as, on this session here, I'm not sure how often you guys are on video calls, but a lot of people are not turning the video on, and you're just talking to the equivalent of this, and that's pretty boring, especially if it's an icon that's in here instead. So if I can encourage people to turn their camera on, share their screen, not send so much email, don't spend all their time in chat, but using more of these enterprise social platforms. I think that's what we found. That's our, I guess, innovation is helping people, nudging them through really simple nudges around their collaboration habits. That's what we're doing. We actually got a new product launching in December around that.
Perfect. And I think there's a lot of research been done about nudges and how effective that can be. So that's fascinating to me. I don't think we have any questions in the chat. Are there any closing thoughts from the panelists that you would like to share before we close the call? Okay. Well, thank you so much, everybody, for joining the panel. I always veer slightly off topic on these calls because you all say such interesting things that I want to dig into them a little bit more. So thank you very much for sharing your thoughts and expertise and for your flexibility.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye-bye.